We're at the entrance to the trail now. I see the scrub oaks behind us. What makes them scrub oaks and not spreading trees?
Okay, there's several factors involved in these different vegetational zones that we'll be seeing as we walk through the Cedar Swamp Trail. One factor is the height of the dunes. The dunes are a protective cover for this area. The sea winds come blowing in, they carry salt and sand, and they actually shear off the tops of these trees. That's why we have a low, shrubby growing vegetation here called scrub oak.
Now we've just come from the ocean zone to the dune zone, and now we're in the scrub oak zone. And if we proceed down this trail here, we're going to end up pretty soon in the cedar zone, aren't we?
We'll go through a pitch pine zone, a hardwood zone, and then down to the cedar swamp.
How long is the trail?
Trail's about a mile long round trip.
All neatly preserved for us by the Park Service?
Nice trail, easy steps to walk. It's a really easy trail.
Okay, well why don't we do it then?
Sounds good. Okay, here we have poison ivy. We have a lot of poison ivy here on Cape Cod. You can recognize it by the 3 leaves, and it's interesting now because it is in flower. Poison ivy can be a tricky plant. It can be many different colors, from green, like we see here, all the way to a deep red or a purple color in the fall.
I've been told it's really good for ground cover.
It's excellent ground cover. The berries are a good source of food for deer and other wildlife.
Still, I'd rather that they use something else.
Well, right now we're at another one of those transition zones that we see on the Cedar Swamp Trail. We are now at the end of the scrub oak and heading into our pitch pine zone.
What causes that discontinuity, Brent?
Again, it's several factors, mainly the distance that we are from the ocean and also the effect of salt spray and sand blowing across the dunes.
This is a pine that's been wounded. A cut's been made here. I guess it's been made by the Park Service, right?
Yes, trail maintenance came in and removed this branch.
And immediately a kind of a sticky sap. What's the purpose of that?
Yeah. Well, these are pitch pine trees, and it's an appropriate name because they have a lot of sap inside of them. When this branch was cut, it left an open wound, which is a good entrance point for disease, fungus, insects. With this heavy sap covering, it kind of protects the wound, protects it from, entrance of all these pathogens.
Any kind of insect you want to enter there would become a fossil rather quickly.
Well, he would be stuck very quickly.
I see it's all dripping down here. This is what they make turpentine out of,
That's
isn't
true.
it?
It's what they call naval stores. It's used for waterproofing.
And this is a lichen. We've got an even nicer lichen over on the next tree here. Lichen's an unusual plant because it's really 2 plants, isn't it?
Yeah, lichens are a symbiosis. 2 plants which are mutually beneficial. It is a fungus and an algae. The fungus provides support, roots. The algae provides the chlorophyll, which takes sunlight and produces it into energy, which the fungus can use.
And without both of them, you don't have a lichen.
Without both of them, you don't have a lichen. That's correct.
We're coming out of the high pines and into the high oaks. What's going on here? Another stage?
We're getting to the end of another transition zone. We are at the end of the pitch pine zone right now. Here we have pitch pines which have reached the heights of 30 or 40 feet. They are far enough back from the ocean that the salt spray isn't affecting the growth of the pines. And again, you have to remember, we're going downhill now. And the tops of these pines are at the same elevation as the dunes are. If you were up at the dunes and looking straight across, it's kind of a level appearance. We're going down, so the pines have more room to grow up.
This should give you an idea of how far downhill we're beginning to go. This chart put out by the Park Service in their brochure gives you indication. We're going down, up a little hill, then down to the point below where the level of the ocean is. And the fresh water in the swamp is floating on top of that. We'll talk about that later. It's getting cooler, isn't it?
Yeah, we're shaded now from the sunlight, from the radiation from the sun, so it's a little nicer down here.
All right. How far down does it go? Do you know?
Well, there's an elevational difference of about 80 feet from the top of the dune down to the swamp where we're going to. We're going to go through a little draw right now, and the draw is it's moister down there. Water runs downhill. It forms a little moist area, and we'll see a change in vegetation as we go down through this area.
Okay. Before we leave here, I want to show this little leaf we found. It's kind of interesting because it has a white thing on it, or it appears to be a white thing. Actually, insect has burrowed underneath the epidermis of the leaf. Wind's picking up here. Brent, I see broken pines here. Can we speculate on why these pines are broken and not the ones next to them? What happened, do you think? Might have happened.
We kind of had an unusual winter on the Cape this year. Had a lot of wet, heavy snow. Now the pines hold their needles throughout the year. So as the snow, this wet, heavy snow came down, the snow rested on top of these trees, and the weight just snapped the trees off. Why these two trees snapped and not others could be any number of reasons. These might have had some insect damage at one time. They might have just been smaller diameter trees, and they just couldn't support the weight of all the snow.
What happened here, Brent?
It's really hard to say, Dave. This tree, when it was younger, it might have been a small diameter tree. For some reason, the tree may have been blown over, or somebody could have sawed it off. And now we have stump sprouts coming up out of this oak tree. And again, this has been quite a few years ago. From the size of the tree, probably 30 or 40 years.
So when you see little sprigs coming out of a stump as a symbol of renewal, it turns into this in 40 years.
True.
Now, one of these trunks is dead, and it seems like there's a whole bunch of insect galleries here. What was this from, do you think?
This is from a bark beetle. The bark beetles will burrow underneath the bark of a tree, between the bark and the hardwood layer, leaving these galleries behind.
They don't care if the tree's dead or not.
No, they'll attack a dead tree, or they can even attack a live tree which has been weakened in some way.
Some of them attack my porch, I think, too.
That's possible.
What happened here? Insects?
Yeah, this tree died a while ago, and insects, termites, any number of insects could have attacked the bottom of the tree.
Is it just going to crash over into the forest?
Well, if it was left to nature, yes, it would. A wind could blow it over very easily. Being that it's this close to the trail, it may cause a little safety hazard, so our trail crews will come in and take it down.
There's something special about this ground cover in here, too. This is not your ordinary poison ivy. What is it?
Oh, nothing near poison ivy. This is teaberry, and it's a sweet-tasting little plant. If you've ever chewed teaberry gum, it tastes a lot like that.
I remember teaberry gum from my childhood.
One of the rules you want to remember while you're in the park is there is no picking of any plants whatsoever.
So it tastes sweet outside the park, but inside the park it tastes like a $15 font.
You could put it that way. Okay, we have sheep laurel here. Sheep laurel is in flower this time of year, and it is a wetland species. We're down at the bottom now where there's a lot more moisture, and these are the kind of this is the kind of plant vegetation you'll find growing.
And this over here, we've got a gall on these leaves. They're all puffed out in the front, and if you look at the back, you see that they're indented on the back. This is from insect larvae?
A gall is a response to an insect or a fungus. That actually is the plant tissue itself responding to some foreign object.
Well, we're in the swamp at last.
Yeah, now we're down in the Atlantic White Cedar Swamp. This swamp was formed over 15,000 years ago. The Cape was formed roughly 15,000 years ago by glaciers. As the climate warmed up and the glaciers started to retreat, they left large chunks of ice either totally buried in the soil or partially buried. As the climate continued to warm up, the ice chunks melted and left shallow depressions in the soil. These turned into freshwater kettle ponds. The swamp that we have here was originally a freshwater kettle pond. Ponds go through succession. They go through changes. As this pond has changed over the last 15,000 years, it has slowly become shallower. The water level has decreased. This is due to sediment filling in the kettle pond, and also organic matter such as leaves, twigs, and grass also filling in. So the water has become more shallow, and that leads to a different type of environment, and that leads to a white cedar swamp like we see here.
Now, this is fresh water, but it's floating on top of the salt water, which is at the same level here, more or less, as it is in the ocean. Am I right?
That's true. Salt water is less dense than...
Fresh water is less dense
Fresh water is less dense than salt water. The fresh water will float on the salt water. And here we have this is the fresh water floating on top of the salt water.
The so-called freshwater lens.
Freshwater lens, exactly.
Must have been difficult to put these boardwalks in here.
Very difficult.
You have to squish along. This was done at the beginning of the park in the 60s?
Right, the boardwalk was put in early 1960s.
And these bushes around here, these are high bush blueberry?
High bush blueberries with an edible berry on them.
But you have to bring your own cream with you.
Right.
What happened here, Brent? Why is it wrapped around nothing?
What could have happened is a small tree may have fell down at one time, and as it probably fell next to the cedar tree, and just the roots of the cedar tree started growing around the log which was laying on the ground. The log which was laying on the ground then decomposed, rotted away, and you had this little hole left in the tree.
Here we are in the White Cedar Swamp Trail, surrounded by white cedars.
Yes, these are the featured trees of this trail. These trees require a lot of sunlight to grow. As you look through the swamp, you won't see many small young cedars growing. This is because they require so much sunlight that they cannot grow in the shade of their parents.
Many of us have that problem. Cedars are good for lumber. For what reason? Why are cedars so favored?
It's a great tree for lumber because it's lightweight, it has a very bright color to it, it is aromatic, decay resistant. It's just a good tree for building houses and things.
That's why they were used for ships, am I right?
Right, the decay resistance.
But they're not the kind that are usually used for the for cedar chests.
That's usually an eastern red cedar.
You have those down at Fort Hill, but not up here at Marconi.
Right, we have those at Fort Hill. They are a dry land species, not to be confused with the Atlantic white cedar.
Now these get to be 40, 50 feet high, some of them, and well over 100 years old.
Yeah, the large tree with the dead branches, it's well over 100 years old and could live to be 150.
People might be a little startled to see cedar trees in Cape Cod. People think of them as a southern vegetation. But actually, when the glaciers came, correct me if I'm wrong, when the glaciers came, everything was cold, and then when they retreated, everything warmed up, and so-called southern vegetation came in again. And then when it got cooler, these southern species were already established, and so they stayed here. And these are a kind of a survival from a southern vegetation area.
That's correct.
I see that Renee has written her name in this tree. What would you do to Renee if you caught her?
Well, it is a destruction of natural resources, so a person could be subject to getting a citation from a law enforcement officer.
And it's a federal citation, so if Renee goes back to Wisconsin, there's going to be a U.S. Marshal on her door one of these days.
I don't know if it would be that severe, but it is a citation which they will have to pay.
Plus the bad karma of riding on the trees. I see these dead these dead branches down here. They're dead on the bottom, but not on the top.
Again, this has to do with the sunlight. You know, they need a lot of sunlight to grow. The young branches cannot get enough sunlight to grow properly.
Brad, this is pretty evil-looking water. What would happen to you if you drank this water?
I'm not sure what reaction you would have, but I would guarantee it probably doesn't taste too good. The brown color you see in the water is a result from tannic acid. Tannic acid is given off when vegetative matter decomposes. When the leaves and the grasses decompose, they give off this acid. It is also caused from anaerobic decomposition, that is, decomposition without oxygen.
Now, I've heard that in the old whaling days, they used to use this water for drinking water because it was so full of tannic acid that bacteria wouldn't grow in it. Is that true, do you think?
That's the story that I've heard, Dave.
Now, I can't imagine what it must have tasted like. I understand that there's tannic acid in tea. Maybe it tasted like tea, but I'm certainly not going to try to find out. I saw little bubblings up there. Was that methane?
Very possible it's methane or swamp gas, which is another byproduct of any kind of decomposition.
Will-o'-the-wisp at night, maybe.
Right.
Now, I'm going to test this water to see how deep it is. There we go. What does it bring us to? 7 inches.
Little over 7 inches. In the spring of the year, you can have as much as a foot of water in the swamp.
So you could, if you wanted to put on your hip boots, you could wade through this.
You could, but it's not a good idea. Very fragile vegetation. We want to try to preserve it in its natural state. That's why we have the boardwalk here.
Here's some fragile vegetation. What's this? Sphagnum moss?
Yeah, this is sphagnum moss, which you'll find growing all throughout the swamp.
No fish in here.
No fish at all. Again, it's very low pH water, very acidic due to the tannic acid.
Frogs and stuff, though?
There
Eels?
are some salamanders and some species of frogs which can be seen in the swamp.
And they must live on insects, of which there are plenty here.
Plenty of insects, mainly mosquitoes.
Mainly mosquitoes. I've heard that there are 10 varieties of mosquitoes. I personally have counted at least 30 varieties of mosquitoes on me alone.
Lots of mosquitoes here, all kinds. 10 different varieties or species of mosquitoes growing out here.
Though I have a theory, Brent, that every creature has a place in God's universe except for the mosquito. And that if all the mosquitoes were eliminated from the world would be a better place. Am I completely wrong about that?
I don't think anybody could make a speculation like that. Everything has its role in nature. Mosquitoes are great food, good food source for all kinds of birds.
I wish the birds would do their job. Oh well. This is a maple tree, right? What's it doing in the cedar swamp?
Well, the swamp goes through succession. One species of plants will replace another species. The red maples will replace the Atlantic white cedars here.
Because the cedars, the canopy covers them and they can't grow, the little ones can't grow?
Right. The red maples can grow in shade, so they can push up through the canopy and they will replace the cedars here.
This is a similar thing to what was happening at the entrance of the trail where the oaks were replacing the pond.
Very true. Ponds go through succession. Land vegetation goes through succession also.
Now, I'm fascinated to hear that this water, which looks so swampy and soupy, is going to be gone in August.
When it gets real warm in the summertime, yes, the water will pretty well disappear. It will be very moist due to the sphagnum moss, but there won't be any standing water.
It'll still sort of go squishy. Don't walk with holes in your shoes.
Right, exactly.
But the water will be gone.
Yeah, it'll be moist, but no standing water.
And then in the spring it comes back again.
Yeah, with the spring rains and snow melt, we'll have water here again.
Still on the maple tree, Brent, that we see this strange formation. What's going on?
Well, these are Epicormic branches which are shooting up from this limb. This limb is at an angle. The sunlight is hitting directly on the side of the limb, and that stimulates auxiliary buds, which are all up and down the length of the limb.
And they're going straight for the sun.
Right, straight up to the sun.
And will they eventually form another limb of the tree heading straight up?
If this branch can support the weight, as long as they grow, sure, they could grow to a good size.
So it's the action of the sunlight on the bark, on the outside of the tree, which triggers this response in maple and laurel and other trees too.
Correct. It's a phototropism.
What's this, Brent?
Well, this is a woody gall on the black oak. Just as we saw galls on the leaves of some of the plant species earlier, this is a woody gall probably caused by a fungus or some kind of insect damage. Again, it's probably happened quite a while ago because it is very large and the tree has continued to grow.
Does the tree excrete this around whatever it was?
Yeah.
In the same way as the pitch pine excreted the pitch?
Yeah, it is a protective measure. Something got into the bark, irritated the tree, so to speak, and it formed this protective covering.
You know, we've been walking around here for quite a while. We haven't seen any animals except for insects and an occasional bird. What kind of animals do you have in the swamp?
Well, you could see white-tailed deer. Now, in the swamp itself, you won't see many mammals. But around the swamp area and the trail that we have been on, you can see white-tailed deer, fox, raccoon,
Plenty of rabbits.
skunks, rabbits. Bird species, you can see owls, horned larks, towhees, blue jays, quite a number,
If
variety
there
of
aren't
birds.
any mammals, what do the owls live on? They go out to
They'll
hunt,
fly somewhere else to feed, yeah.
and then they come back and live in the swamp.
Yeah, they nest around the swamp in some of the dead trees.
No, there are no crocodiles.
No crocodiles here, a little too far north.
Okay. This path here is kind of interesting. Everything else is sort of windy and curvy, and this is a really straight path. What is this for?
Well, this is what we call the old wireless road. When Marconi had his radio tower up by the dunes, he used this to get supplies from Wellfleet to the radio station site.
Because there was no paved road in those days.
No roads in those times, no.
So he must have had this cut through by a logging team or something. And
Some of his own people probably just, you know, chopped down a few of the trees.
And that goes straight out to the parking lot.
Straight out to the parking lot and the end of the trail.
The end of the trail at where Marconi's station used to be.
That's true.
Well, Brent, this has been really fascinating. I want to thank you very much for being on Show and Tell.
It's been very interesting. I enjoyed it.
And that's it for today. This has been Show and Tell. I'm David Phillips, and thanks for watching.